There's something oddly comforting about imagining a fire flickering in the darkness, the crackle of dry branches breaking into glowing embers, and a group of our prehistoric ancestors huddled together against the chill of the night. Sleep for them wasn't just about rest. It was survival, ritual, and something strangely mysterious that even modern science struggles to fully explain. When we think about cavemen, we tend to imagine simple, straightforward lives. Eat, hunt, survive. But when the sun went down and the world plunged into near-total darkness, their relationship with sleep was far more complex than most people today realize. This was not the 9-to-5 world of alarm clocks and memory foam mattresses. This was a world where every shadow could hold danger. Every sound could mean life or death. And yet somehow people still managed to drift into deep restorative sleep. It makes you wonder, how exactly did cavemen sleep, and what secrets are still hidden in the silence of those ancient nights? Before we wander too far into this strange and fascinating journey through prehistoric nights, I'd like to pause for just a moment. If you're enjoying this kind of storytelling and you'd like to keep diving into the forgotten parts of human history, I'd love for you to subscribe. That way you won't miss the next time we unravel one of these mysteries. And if you could leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from right now and what time it is for you. I find it amazing to imagine people in all corners of the world at different hours of their day or night, all connected through these ancient stories. Now, with that little moment of connection made, let's slip back in time together. To understand caveman's sleep, we have to strip away all the luxuries we take for granted. There were no clocks to tell them when to wake up, no glowing street lights to push back the night. Their rhythms were carved by firelight, the moon, and the turning of the seasons. But here's the strange thing. Evidence from anthropology and sleep studies suggests that cavemen didn't necessarily sleep the way we do now. Instead of one long stretch of unconsciousness, their nights were often broken into phases, sometimes called segmented sleep. They might drift off soon after darkness fell, wake up in the middle of the night for a few hours to tend the fire, share stories, or even look after children, and then return to a second deep sleep before dawn. This pattern, oddly enough, isn't just guesswork. It shows up in historical records as late as the Middle Ages, where people casually mentioned their first sleep and second sleep. It's as though our ancestors were wired for a different kind of slumber altogether. Science, however, still can't fully explain why this segmented sleep seemed natural for so long, or why modern society has drifted so far from it. Some researchers suspect it had to do with safety. By breaking sleep into chunks, groups could make sure that someone was always awake enough to notice danger. Others suggest it was about energy efficiency, adapting to the unpredictable demands of a life lived outdoors. Imagine being deep in a cave with your family, the fire sputtering low, and half the group lightly dozing while the other half listens to the night. Then hours later, everyone sinks into another round of deep rest, waking up with the rising sun. It's almost alien compared to the strict 8 hours we think of today, and yet it may have been more natural for the human body than what we currently force ourselves into. Even more intriguing are the clues found in the actual places where these people slept. Excavations of caves in Europe and Africa have revealed depressions in the ground where soft bedding was built up from grass, leaves, and animal hides. Traces of ash were often found nearby, suggesting that fires were kept burning close to where people slept, not only for warmth, but also to keep pests and predators at bay. In some cases, researchers even found layers of insect-repelling plants woven into these sleeping areas. So, not only were cavemen practical about their rest, but they also had an intuitive understanding of how to make it healthier and safer. These discoveries suggest that sleep wasn't just unconscious downtime. It was carefully managed, almost engineered to give the group its best chance of survival. Now, here's the fascinating twist. Modern sleep science has begun circling back to some of these ancient practices. For example, studies show that small amounts of firelight or natural moonlight are less disruptive to sleep cycles than the harsh blue light of our phones and screens. It's almost ironic, really. The people we think of as primitive might have actually enjoyed sleep that was more in tune with human biology than ours today. The segmented nights, the protective warmth of communal resting, even the sounds of nature, all of these may have shaped brains and bodies to rest in ways that modern humans have nearly forgotten. And that's where the real mystery lies. If cavemen slept in such a way that worked perfectly with their environment, Why do we, with all our advanced science, still struggle so much to sleep? It's in that paradox, the idea that we know so much yet still fail at something as basic as sleep, where this story really begins. Because as we move deeper into this journey, we'll see that caveman sleep wasn't just about lying down at night. It was about community, survival strategies, rituals we barely understand, and patterns hidden deep in our biology. And in some ways, it holds secrets that science still hasn't been able to crack. But to understand those secrets fully, we'll have to step further into the shadows of the prehistoric night, where the line between safety and danger blurred, and sleep was something more profound than we give it credit for today. When the darkness thickened and the fire dimmed to glowing embers, cavemen had no choice but to trust their instincts, and perhaps each other more than anything else. Imagine a group gathered at the mouth of a cave where the cool night air slips in and the scents of damp earth and smoke blend together. The quiet was never absolute. Outside, owls shrieked, wolves howled, insects hummed. These sounds, so easily drowned out in our world by the hum of refrigerators and distant traffic, were constant reminders to prehistoric people that the world did not sleep just because they did. In such an atmosphere, drifting off wasn't about comfort. It was about timing, trust, and a delicate balance between vigilance and vulnerability. Modern researchers often argue that this tension shaped the very structure of their sleep. Shorter cycles, lighter slumber, and an almost built-in readiness to wake if danger came close. Our ancestors were not careless dreamers. They were practical, always half aware of the world pressing in. Anthropologists studying present-day hunter-gatherer tribes, such as the Hadza of Tanzania, the Sand in southern Africa, or groups in the Amazon, have noticed something striking. Within any camp, people rarely all sleep at once. Instead, their sleep is staggered, overlapping in a way that ensures there is nearly always someone awake. This sentinel hypothesis, as it's sometimes called, suggests that the need for safety shaped human rest in a fundamental way. And though thousands of years separate us from those early nights, the same biology lives inside us. It might explain why so many of us wake up at odd hours for no apparent reason. The faint echo of an ancient system whispering, someone has to keep watch. If you think about it, it makes sense. A group that slept entirely through the night without someone stirring or shifting or listening for predators might not have lasted very long. What looks like disordered sleep to us may actually have been perfect sleep for them. But safety wasn't the only factor at play. Cavemen lived by natural cycles we barely notice anymore. The waxing and waning of the moon, the length of shadows, the brightness of starlight on clear nights. Evidence from archaeology suggests that certain caves with wide entrances may have been chosen not just for shelter, but because they caught the moonlight at night. This wasn't coincidence. Paleolithic people had an awareness of celestial rhythms, and their resting places reflected that. Light influenced melatonin production in their brains just as it does in ours today. But unlike us, they weren't battling the artificial glare of electricity. Instead, their nights breathed in tune with nature. Sometimes brighter, sometimes darker, sometimes endless depending on the season. This variability might explain why their sleep was flexible, why they adapted so well to broken rest, and why seasonal changes left such strong imprints on their lives. We also know, surprisingly, that cavemen crafted bedding far earlier than we once believed. At sites like Sabudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered plant bedding layers dating back nearly 80,000 years. These weren't just piles of grass. They were carefully chosen plants, some with natural insect-repelling properties. It's easy to imagine a group gathering leaves and grasses not only for comfort, but also for health, reducing exposure to parasites, pests, and disease. Add animal hides for insulation, and suddenly the image of a caveman sleeping on cold rock collapses. The truth is, they engineered their rest with thoughtfulness, layering materials for warmth and hygiene. It's a detail that brings them closer to us. They wanted a good night's rest, not simply because it felt nice, but because it made them stronger, more alert, and more capable of surviving the harsh demands of the following day. Then comes the strange matter of dreams. Science still debates what dreams really do for us. But for prehistoric people, dreams were likely more than random brain chatter. Ethnographic studies show that modern indigenous tribes often treat dreams as messages, guidance from ancestors, or spirits shaping daily decisions. If this mindset stretches back, and it almost certainly does, then cavemen may have leaned on dreams as part of their survival toolkit. A dream could warn them of danger, encourage them to travel, or even strengthen group bonds when shared around the fire the next morning. Imagine waking from a vivid vision in a cave, describing it to your kin, and having the group shift plans because of it. To us, that might sound irrational to them. It may have been perfectly reasonable. After all, in a world filled with unknowns, why not take meaning from the only private universe they had each night? Dreams in this sense weren't just entertainment. They were guiding stars of the unconscious. All of these elements, vigilance, rhythm, bedding, dreams, paint a picture of sleep that was far from simple. It was layered, intentional, and even sacred in its own way. To lie down in darkness with your family, wrapped in hides, hearing the fire's low crackle, knowing someone was half awake while you drifted into a dream that might guide tomorrow. That was prehistoric sleep. Science, even today, tries to replicate these environments in labs, measuring brain waves, hormone cycles, and stress levels. And often what researchers find is that our modern bodies still respond best in those ancient conditions. It's as if somewhere deep inside we are still wired for the cave. Yet the question lingers like smoke in the night air. If cavemen found such natural, effective ways to rest, why does modern society, with all its knowledge, still spend billions chasing sleep we so easily lost? The world our ancestors slept in wasn't a stable or forgiving place. It was unpredictable, swinging between long stretches of warmth and bitter ages of ice. During the colder periods of prehistory, the very act of falling asleep became both a risk and a necessity. Imagine lying down in a cave while icy winds howled outside, snow piled at the entrance, and the air inside grew heavy with smoke from a struggling fire. In such moments, sleep wasn't a luxury. It was energy conservation. Every breath had to count, every movement calculated because wasting heat meant courting death. The cold shaped their nights into rituals, huddling closer, layering furs, guarding the fire like it was the heart of their world. In this sense, sleep became a communal event, and survival hinged on how well they managed to rest together. There's compelling evidence suggesting that humans may have flirted with a kind of semi-hibernation in extreme environments. While we don't fully hibernate like bears, some scientists believe prehistoric populations living in Ice Age Europe entered extended states of torpor, periods of slowed metabolism and longer sleep-like states during the darkest, coldest months. This theory comes in part from studies of ancient bones, where signs of seasonal malnutrition mirror patterns seen in hibernating animals. It's a controversial idea, but one that adds depth to the mystery. Were cavemen capable of slowing themselves down to endure winter? Picture an entire group spending more hours than usual in slumber, conserving calories, waiting for the earth to thaw. Modern science can't say for certain, but the possibility lingers, hinting that our species' relationship with sleep may once have been far stranger than we assume. Even when not in a state of semi-hibernation, cold forced our ancestors to innovate. Fire was essential, but fire alone couldn't always hold back freezing nights. Archaeological digs in Siberia and Central Europe revealed dwellings insulated with mammoth bones packed with moss and lined with hides, all designed to trap heat. Within these shelters, sleep might have come in layers. Light dozing close to the flames. Deeper rest once the embers warmed the space. The communal huddle wasn't just for affection. It was a biological strategy. Sharing body heat in close quarters could raise temperatures enough to keep infants and elders alive through brutal nights. The result? Cavemen developed social bonds, not just in waking life, but in the very arrangement of their sleeping bodies. Sleep and survival were woven together in the most literal sense. Seasonal extremes also influenced the timing of their rest. During long winters with daylight scarce, cavemen may have followed extended cycles of sleep and waking, their bodies responding directly to the rhythm of light and dark. In contrast, summer nights, shorter and warmer, allowed for lighter, briefer rests. Evidence from hunter-gatherers in equatorial regions today shows similar patterns. Sleep duration shrinks in the dry season and stretches in the wet season. Our prehistoric ancestors likely mirrored these shifts, adapting without hesitation. Their nights weren't locked into the rigid 8-hour block we treat as normal. They were elastic, bending with the environment, shaped by necessity rather than cultural expectation. It's tempting to think of sleep purely as downtime, but in prehistoric winters, sleep doubled as strategy. Rest wasn't only for recovery, but for rationing energy. Dreaming through the worst hours of cold meant less fuel burned, fewer calories consumed, and a better chance of making it to spring. If you've ever pulled the covers tighter on a freezing night and wished to simply sleep until it's over, you've brushed against an ancient instinct. Cavemen lived it fully. Their survival often depended not on constant activity, but on mastering stillness, the art of surrendering to sleep as a weapon against the season itself. And so in the depths of winter, sleep was more than biological. It was communal, adaptive, and possibly even transformative. Science struggles to capture this complexity in tidy explanations because it was a way of being, not just a bodily function. Our ancestors used sleep to bend time, to stretch resources, to outlast the forces of nature itself. And though we may never fully know the limits of what they achieved in those frozen nights, the traces left behind in bones, shelters, and the stories hinted by ethnography whisper that prehistoric sleep was not weaker than ours, but far more resilient. It carried them through ages when the world itself seemed hostile to life. If the icy caves of Ice Age Europe demanded huddled survival, the warmer landscapes of Africa and southern Asia presented an entirely different challenge. Here, cavemen often slept under open skies where the threat wasn't freezing to death, but rather dealing with heat, humidity, and a constant barrage of insects. Imagine lying down on the packed earth after a long day of gathering fruit or hunting small game. The air still heavy with the day's warmth, your body slick with sweat and the chirping of crickets filling the night. Sleep here wasn't about conserving heat. It was about finding relief, cooling down, and staying safe from creatures that thrived in the darkness. This environment pushed our ancestors into developing sleep strategies that were less about insulation and more about protection and awareness. One of the cleverest adaptations came in the form of elevated sleeping platforms. Archaeological evidence, along with studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, suggests that prehistoric people sometimes built raised beds from branches or slept on woven mats lifted above the ground. This wasn't luxury. It was necessity. Sleeping on bare soil exposed you to crawling insects, scorpions, snakes, and parasites. A bit of height created safety. Some of the earliest plant-based bedding ever discovered, like at the Border Cave in South Africa, showed layers of grass and leaves intentionally arranged, not just for comfort, but also to repel pests. Certain plants, when crushed, released chemicals that discouraged mosquitoes and ticks. It wasn't trial and error, it was knowledge, carefully passed down. In warm climates, sleep wasn't passive. It was actively engineered against the living threats of the night. There's also evidence that fire beyond warmth served as a nocturnal shield in tropical and subtropical regions. Small fires were sometimes arranged not just at camp centers, but around sleeping areas like protective rings. Smoke kept biting insects at bay, and the glow created a boundary against larger predators. Some researchers even suggest that firelight influenced group sleep by extending waking hours just slightly. Enough for storytelling, planning, or rituals, but not enough to disrupt natural circadian rhythms. In fact, studies of indigenous groups who still live close to nature show that firelight before sleep doesn't disturb melatonin the way artificial light does today. Instead, it seems to cue relaxation. For cavemen, fire wasn't simply survival tech. It was part of their sleep hygiene long before we coined such a term. Warmer nights also encouraged different sleeping postures and arrangements. Some groups may have slept sprawled in circles with heads pointed inward and feet outward, creating a protective ring around children in the center. Others may have rested in staggered shifts, ensuring that no one was ever completely vulnerable. Unlike the frozen huddles of the north, here bodies could spread out, catching breezes, finding comfort in space. Yet the communal element never disappeared. Sleeping near others reduced anxiety, making it easier to relax despite the constant hum of nighttime life. In fact, research shows that people sleeping alone in modern studies often wake more frequently than those sleeping with others. That ancient instinct for shared rest still lives quietly within us. The warm climate also shifted the timing of sleep. Instead of long, consolidated slumbers, cavemen may have slept in shorter bursts, napping in shaded areas during the day when the heat was oppressive, then resting again at night. This polyphasic style of rest, broken into multiple intervals, made sense in an environment where activity had to be. balanced with the scorching sun. Modern comparisons can be drawn with siesta cultures where midday naps naturally evolved as adaptations to heat. For prehistoric people, this wasn't cultural preference. It was survival. Their sleep mirrored the land, adjusting fluidly to its rhythms with no guilt over irregular patterns. Taken together, the warmth of southern nights, the constant threat of insects, and the adaptability of human sleep paint a picture of remarkable ingenuity. Cavemen were not at the mercy of their environment. They shaped their rest to match it. Raised bedding, pest-repelling plants, protective fire rings, and flexible sleep schedules reveal a level of sophistication that modern people often overlook. When we imagine the past, we tend to think of crude, harsh lives. But in truth, prehistoric nights show us how inventive, observant, and resilient our ancestors were. They turned the wild into something livable, even restful, transforming the dangers of the night into manageable obstacles. And perhaps that's one of the greatest secrets of caveman sleep. It wasn't fragile. It bent, it shifted, and it endured, no matter what the world threw at them. For prehistoric people, the line between waking and sleeping was not as sharply drawn as it is for us today. The modern world treats sleep as downtime, a kind of biological chore we must complete before resuming real life. But for cavemen, sleep was a world of its own, one that carried weight, meaning, and mystery. Dreams especially blurred the boundary between the visible and invisible. A dream wasn't simply a flicker of imagination. It could be a message, an omen, or even a direct connection to forces they didn't fully understand. To close your eyes by the fire and wake with a vivid vision of hunting, danger, or ancestors was to hold knowledge that might influence the choices of the entire group. Sleep was not passive. It was a nightly journey into another realm. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer tribes give us a lens into this mindset. Among the Sand people of the Kalahari, dreams are treated as messages from the spirit world, guiding daily decisions. The Amazonian Akwar people believe dreams reveal hidden truths, sometimes more real than waking experiences. If this is true today, it is almost certain that Paleolithic humans thought along the same lines. Imagine a group gathered around morning embers retelling the night's dreams. One person describing a hunt that went wrong, another recounting the image of a glowing animal, another speaking of voices from long-dead kin. These stories weren't shrugged off as meaningless. They were considered guidance woven into plans for the day. Sleep wasn't just rest, it was consultation. This belief in the power of dreams may explain why prehistoric art and ritual carry so many otherworldly themes. Cave paintings, with their half-human, half-animal figures, could easily be reflections of dream imagery. The painted walls of Lascaux or Chauvet might not have been simple hunting instructions, but attempts to preserve visions that appeared at night, captured in pigment before they faded from memory. Shamans, or the earliest versions of them, may have risen from dreams convinced they had walked between worlds. To the group, their sleep was a gift, a skill, or perhaps even a burden. This reverence for what the night revealed gave sleep a sacred dimension that science today still can't pin down. The mysterious nature of dreams also shaped fear. Nightmares weren't just uncomfortable. They could be taken as warnings. If someone dreamed of an attack, the group might tighten defenses that night. If a dream showed a journey, the group might consider moving camp. Even modern researchers are surprised at how often dreams provide problem-solving insight, replaying real-world challenges in symbolic ways. For prehistoric people, this connection was too strong to ignore. The subconscious, though they didn't have a word for it, was another voice at the council fire. To disregard it would have seemed foolish, even dangerous beyond dreams. Sleep itself may have been wrapped in ritual. Some archaeologists speculate that certain sleeping areas and caves were deliberately chosen for acoustics, places where the crackle of fire and distant echoes created an atmosphere unlike anywhere else. In such places, falling asleep may have felt like entering sacred space. There may have been chants, calming rhythms, or even herbal preparations to encourage rest. Just as they understood which plants repelled insects, they likely learned which herbs soothed the mind or body. The nightly retreat into unconsciousness was never ordinary. It was treated as a passage from light to dark, known to unknown, flesh to spirit. To us, it might sound like superstition, but in truth it reveals how deeply human beings have always sought meaning in the most basic parts of existence. Prehistoric people didn't simply collapse at night. They stepped into a world of visions, omens, and guidance that was as real to them as hunting or gathering. Science, for all its progress, still can't fully explain why we dream or why some dreams feel charged with significance. And so, in a strange twist, cavemen may have lived closer to the truth of sleep than we do. To them, sleep was not an interruption of life. It was another layer of it. When the fire's glow dimmed and the night pressed in, survival depended not just on individual instincts, but on the structure of the group. Cavemen didn't live in isolation. They were bound together in small bands, usually between 20 and 40 people. And within that circle, the way they slept reflected both biology and social order. To lie down at night was not only a personal choice, but a communal strategy. It meant trusting others, dividing responsibility, and positioning yourself within the group in ways that could quite literally mean the difference between life and death. Sleep wasn't a solitary event. It was choreography. Each body placed with care, each role understood, even if never spoken aloud. One pattern suggested by studies of modern hunter-gatherers is the idea of rotating vigilance. Even in deep rest, someone was almost always awake, tending the fire, soothing a child, or responding to noises in the dark. The sentinel hypothesis, often observed among the Hadza of Tanzania, makes a strong case that prehistoric humans staggered their sleep in subtle ways, creating a natural form of watch duty without drawing lots or making rigid schedules. The group instinctively balanced vigilance and rest. A mother with a restless infant might be awake for part of the night. A hunter returning late from tracking game might sit by the fire before lying down. An elder might sleep more lightly, waking at the slightest sound. Together, these rhythms overlapped into a safety net. In other words, no one had to stay awake all night, but someone almost always did. The physical arrangement of sleep also reveals fascinating clues. Many anthropologists believe that families and close kins slept side by side, while the group as a whole often formed clusters or circles. Children were kept in the middle, surrounded by adults whose bodies created a living barrier against the outside world. In colder climates, this circle tightened for warmth. In warmer ones, it spread slightly for comfort, but the pattern of protection remained. Archaeological digs sometimes reveal sleeping depressions in caves that align with this theory. Rings of flattened ground or clusters of bedding material suggesting deliberate organization rather than random sprawl. These formations weren't just about comfort. They reflected unspoken rules of care and defense. There was also an invisible hierarchy in these sleeping spaces. Those most vulnerable, infants, children, and sometimes elders, stayed closest to the fire or the safest part of the shelter. Stronger adults positioned themselves at the edges where they could intercept threats. This arrangement reinforced social roles: protectors on the perimeter, nurturers in the core. Interestingly, studies of modern primates show similar behavior, with dominant males often taking positions that face outward toward danger, while others cluster inward. In this way, human sleep carried echoes of evolutionary instincts, blending protection, order, and intimacy into one nightly ritual. But this system wasn't purely defensive. It also fostered trust and connection. To fall asleep near someone was to place your safety in their hands, to allow yourself vulnerability night after night. This act reinforced bonds, making the group feel less like a loose gathering and more like family. Even today, research shows that shared sleep, whether between parents and children or partners, often reduces stress hormones and creates a sense of security. Our ancestors, without articulating it, understood this truth. Their nightly arrangements were not only shields against predators, but also the glue that kept their fragile communities together. Sleep, in this sense, wasn't separate from social life. It was part of it. If you imagine one of those prehistoric nights, bodies close together, a watchful figure feeding the fire, the soft breathing of children in the center, and the occasional stir of someone shifting awake, you begin to see how sleep itself became a communal language. It was where trust was expressed without words, where roles were quietly affirmed, and where survival was rehearsed in the most intimate way. Science can measure sleep cycles and brain waves, but it struggles to capture this deeper truth. Prehistoric sleep was collective. To rest was not to disconnect, but to weave yourself more tightly into the fabric of the group. And in that perhaps lies another secret we've almost forgotten. Not every member of a prehistoric group experienced sleep in the same way. Age, health, and role within the band shaped how and when people drifted off. For infants, And children, rest was chaotic and fragmented, filled with constant waking, crying, and feeding. Their tiny bodies demanded nourishment at unpredictable intervals, and their developing nervous systems kept them restless. To the group, this wasn't just background noise. It was a nightly reality that forced adaptation. A crying child could attract predators or weaken the silence that protected the group. Parents, often mothers, responded instinctively, rocking, nursing, or soothing at all hours. In doing so, they disrupted their own rest, but created a rhythm where lighter adult sleep coincided with a child's needs. In this sense, the irregular patterns of infants didn't break the group's rest. They became part of it. Archaeological evidence supports the importance of protecting children during sleep. In some cave shelters, small pits or depressions are thought to have been used as infant beds lined with soft grasses and hides. These were positioned deep within the sleeping circle, ensuring warmth and safety. Ethnographic parallels show that even today, many hunter-gatherer societies practice close co-sleeping, keeping infants against the body to regulate temperature and breathing. Modern sleep experts often debate the safety of this, but for prehistoric people, it wasn't a choice. It was survival. To leave a child unattended would have been unthinkable. Sleep then became an intergenerational bond, adults drifting in and out of light slumber, infants pulling them back into wakefulness, and the group as a whole adjusting around the smallest members. Children slightly older past infancy added another layer to the nightly rhythm. Their sleep was deeper, but their imaginations and fears often ran wild. Night terrors or dreams might have sent them clinging to adults, sparking comfort rituals that resembled the bedtime routines we know today. A story by the fire, a soothing voice, the warmth of a parent's side. These moments humanized the night, transforming it from a time of fear into one of connection. Archaeologists have even speculated that some cave art may have served as visual anchors for children, symbolic guardians against the unknown. Whether or not that was their purpose, the need to reassure the young during darkness undoubtedly shaped how the group structured its nights. Adults bore the brunt of the work during the day and often sought the deepest rest at night. Yet even their sleep was fragmented by responsibility, tending fires, caring for children, or shifting position to guard the group's edge. The burden was uneven. Hunters exhausted from long pursuits may have collapsed into heavy slumber, while gatherers, healers, or toolmakers kept lighter, more interrupted rhythms. Sleep here wasn't uniform or fair. It was distributed according to need, energy spent, and responsibilities carried. Still, it worked. The constant overlapping of deep and light sleep ensured that while some were fully vulnerable, others were alert enough to stir. Elders played a surprisingly crucial role in this system. Anthropological studies show that older members of hunter-gatherer groups often sleep less soundly, waking frequently in the night. In modern life, this can feel like a burden, but in prehistory, it was a gift. Elders acted as natural sentinels, their restless sleep turning them into guardians. They could tend the fire when others slept, respond to noises, or comfort a child who stirred. In return, they benefited from the protection and warmth of the group. Sleep became a form of social exchange where even the vulnerabilities of aging served the collective good. What today we might call insomnia may once have been a survival tool. The interplay of infants, children, adults, and elders created a nightly symphony of wakefulness and rest. It wasn't the silent uniform sleep we imagine, but a layered experience where needs overlapped and balanced each other, every cry, every stir. Every restless elder shifting near the fire contributed to a web of protection and connection. Science can chart circadian rhythms and measure sleep cycles, but it can't capture the way a child's small body nestled into a parent's chest while an Ehlers' sharp ears caught a rustle in the dark. Prehistoric sleep was not just biology. It was community in action stretched across generations, ensuring that everyone from the youngest to the oldest had a role to play in surviving the night. Sleep, for all its natural rhythm, was never immune to disruption. In times of plenty, when food was steady and water was close, rest could be deeper, more restorative. But in seasons of scarcity, when famine gripped the land, when rains failed to come, or when migration pulled people across harsh terrain, the structure of prehistoric sleep changed dramatically. Nights that once brought relief instead carried gnawing hunger, and the body deprived of fuel became restless. Anthropologists studying starvation patterns note that hunger itself interferes with sleep cycles, making rest shallow and broken. For cavemen, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a dangerous spiral. Poor sleep reduced alertness, which made hunting or foraging less effective, which in turn deepened the scarcity. To escape it, groups often turned sleep itself into a tool of survival, adjusting when, how, and even if they rested at all. Migration was one of the harshest tests of this adaptability. When herds moved or water dried up, people were forced to walk for days, sometimes weeks, covering unfamiliar terrain. Sleep under these conditions couldn't be leisurely. It had to be snatched in fragments, in whatever shelter was available, beneath trees, in shallow caves, or even in open fields. Imagine lying down on hard earth after walking for 10 hours. Too exhausted to care about comfort, yet still too wary of predators to truly let go. Some researchers suggest that in such times, the group relied more heavily on rotating rest, with smaller numbers sleeping while others pressed on. This wasn't restorative sleep as we think of it today, but survival sleep, barely enough to sustain the body for the demands of the next day. In famine, sleep took on another strange role: conservation. With little food, the body naturally slows, encouraging longer periods of inactivity. Some anthropologists believe that during lean seasons, people may have leaned into extended bouts of drowsiness or semi-rest, conserving energy as much as possible. It wasn't hibernation, but it mirrored the same principle. Less movement, fewer calories burned, more time spent in a state of stillness. Ironically, hunger often makes sleep more difficult. And yet, in extreme deprivation, fatigue can overwhelm the body, pushing it into longer periods of lethargy. These contradictory forces created nights that were both restless and heavy, a haze of drifting in and out of consciousness without true comfort. Scarcity also reshaped the emotional texture of sleep. In good times, rest was communal and reassuring. In desperate times, it may have been anxious and fractured. Dreams likely became darker, filled with imagery of hunger, fear, and uncertainty. The sharing of these dreams in the morning could have deepened collective worry, but also forged resolve. Some groups may even have turned to ritual before bed, chants, smoke, or gestures to ask for guidance or luck. Sleep became not just physical recovery, but a space for the group to confront its fears together. Every night was a gamble. Would the morning bring food or more hunger? Would rest restore strength or erode it further? Even migration itself left imprints on how cavemen approached sleep. Archaeological evidence from temporary campsites shows traces of makeshift bedding, quickly gathered grasses or leaves that hint at short stays. Unlike the carefully layered bedding of long-term shelters, these were expedient solutions. The quality of sleep in such places would have been poor, but it was never absent. To skip sleep entirely would have risked collapse. The balance lay in finding just enough rest to move forward. Modern soldiers or nomadic groups offer similar parallels today. Sleep is fragmented, strategic, and never fully satisfying, yet somehow enough to push through. When we look back at these nights of scarcity, one truth emerges clearly. Prehistoric people treated sleep as a tool as much as a necessity. They bent it, stretched it, and reshaped it to match the demands of survival. It was never rigid. Never something to lose track of or measure by hours. It was adaptable, responsive, and deeply tied to the environment. In this way, sleep itself became a form of resilience, a hidden ally that carried people through hunger, drought, and the endless miles of migration. Modern science can document sleep deprivation in controlled settings, but it still struggles to explain how our ancestors managed to endure with so little. Perhaps the answer lies not in their biology alone, but in their mindset. For them, sleep was not a fragile luxury, but a shape-shifting necessity that could bend as far as life demanded. When night fell, the world did not quiet down. It came alive in a different way. For prehistoric humans, sleep meant surrendering to a darkness filled with eyes, teeth, and wings. Every rustle of grass, every low growl in the distance carried a reminder that they were not the only ones awake. Lions, hyenas, leopards, bears, wolves all prowled the night, their senses sharper than any humans. To close one's eyes in such a world was an act of courage, and perhaps part of why prehistoric sleep was so light, so fragmented. Anthropologists often argue that humans evolved as uneasy sleepers because of predators. It wasn't laziness that made us wake often or stir at the faintest sound. It was survival. Sleep wasn't fragile. It was cautious, wired to jolt us awake at the snap of a twig. Predators weren't the only nocturnal menace. Insects buzzed, crawled, and stung, threatening comfort and health alike. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes, ticks-carrying fevers, biting flies, all existed long before humans learned how to fight them. Yet archaeology shows that cavemen weren't helpless against these tiny tormentors. They used smoke from fires as deterrents, choosing bedding plants that naturally repelled pests, and in some cases even coating their skin with ash or mud. These weren't crude solutions, but early forms of pest management, blending observation and instinct. In warm regions especially, a good night's sleep depended less on fear of lions and more on how well you could keep insects at bay. The war against tiny creatures shaped nightly rituals just as much as the battle against larger predators. But the story of prehistoric nights isn't only about enemies. Some animals may have provided comfort, companionship, and even an early sense of partnership. There's growing evidence that wolves began associating with humans tens of thousands of years ago, drawn by scraps of food and firelight. Over time, this tentative connection may have given groups an advantage. A wolf lying near the fire could sense approaching predators long before humans did, offering a living alarm system. It's impossible to say exactly when this bond began. But the seeds of our relationship with dogs may have been planted during these long nights. If so, then sleep was not just a time of vulnerability. It was the very moment when trust between species first began to grow. Other animals, too, played subtler roles in shaping rest. Bats fluttered overhead. Owls called in the distance and insects hummed continuously. These sounds may have been unsettling, but they also created a kind of background noise that modern science calls natural white noise. Studies show that consistent environmental sounds can actually help people sleep by masking sudden disruptions. The chorus of the night wasn't just danger. It was also rhythm, a steady soundtrack against which rest unfolded. The relationship with predators and pests also forced innovation in sleeping locations. Caves were valued not only for warmth and shelter, but also for the physical barrier they created. A narrow entrance, easily guarded by fire or stones, was far safer than open ground. In regions without caves, groups often sought high ground, cliffsides, or even trees. There are ethnographic accounts of certain hunter-gatherers sleeping in makeshift tree platforms to avoid ground predators. Though precarious, such strategies show the lengths people went to carve safety from the night. Sleep wasn't about comfort first. It was about calculation, finding the place where risk was lowest. In the end, the animals of the night shaped prehistoric sleep as much as fire, shelter, or climate. They were constant presences, sometimes enemies, sometimes allies, sometimes invisible, but always there. To rest in that world was to accept coexistence with the wolf's growl, the lion's shadow, the mosquito's whine, the owl's call. Sleep became a negotiation, a compromise struck between human vulnerability and the wilderness pressing in. Science can measure the stress hormones that rise when predators are near, but it can't capture the raw tension of lying in the dark. Your life entrusted to the thin barrier of firelight and the hope that the night would pass quietly. Yet, somehow, in that delicate balance, humans found enough rest to endure and perhaps even to dream. When modern people look up at the night sky, it's usually a passing glance, a twinkle of stars glimpsed on the way home, or the moon framed between buildings. For prehistoric humans, the sky was not background decoration. It was the ceiling of their world. Every night it stretched endlessly above them, guiding, warning, and measuring time. Sleep in this environment wasn't dictated by alarm clocks or glowing phone screens, but by the movements of celestial bodies, the moon's phases, the stars' positions, and the gradual shift of constellations across seasons all played a role in shaping when and how people rested. The night sky, in effect, was both calendar and lullaby. The moon, in particular, exerted an undeniable influence. In the absence of artificial light, a full moon transformed the night into a silver-lit world where shadows stretched and predators prowled more easily. Groups may have slept more lightly on these nights, alert to dangers moving in the illuminated darkness. Some anthropologists suggest that even today, humans show subtle changes in sleep during full moons with reduced deep sleep and slightly delayed onset. Whether that's biological or psychological is debated, but for cavemen, it was real enough. A bright moon could mean extended evening activities, more hunting, more travel, or more storytelling by firelight. But it also meant vigilance. Sleep shrank or shifted, stretched across the moon's rhythm as reliably as the tides. The stars, too, offered guidance. Certain constellations signaled seasons when herds would migrate, when fruits ripened, when colder nights were coming. These patterns weren't abstract. They were survival tools. A group looking up at Orion or the Pleiades didn't see distant suns, but signs, reminders of what the land would soon demand. Sleep, then, was seasonal in rhythm, waxing and waning with the skies. In long winters, when stars dominated the early evenings, rest extended. In summers, when nights shortened, sleep contracted. Modern humans still carry echoes of this rhythm, but it is muted by electric light that erases seasonal cues. Cavemen lived in sync with it, their very biology tuned to the movements above. There's also the question of ritual. Archaeologists have found alignments in ancient sites, stone circles, carved markers that suggest prehistoric people didn't just observe the sky, they celebrated it. It's not difficult to imagine that sleeping beneath a canopy of stars wasn't always just practical, but sometimes sacred. Certain nights, perhaps under rare celestial events like eclipses or meteor showers, may have been treated as extraordinary occasions when normal sleep was suspended for watchfulness, awe, or communal ritual. In this sense, the heavens weren't merely a clock, but also a stage for meaning, weaving wonder into the fabric of nightly rest. Another overlooked factor is navigation. During migrations, sleep and the stars were inseparable. A group traveling across open plains or along coastlines may have rested only when certain stars appeared overhead, using the sky as both guide and reassurance. Imagine lying on your back exhausted after a day's march, staring at a constellation that pointed the way forward. To wake in the night and see it still hanging above would be to know you were on the right path. Sleep in such times was never disconnected from direction. The stars, while silent, kept watch as much as the fire or the sentinel, awake by the embers. Altogether, the night sky stitched itself into prehistoric sleep. With a subtle but constant presence, the moon altered vigilance. The stars shaped seasons, and rare celestial events carved memories that echoed across generations. Science can measure lunar cycles and circadian rhythms, but it struggles to capture the emotional truth. To fall asleep under that vast canopy was to feel both vulnerable and connected, small, yet part of something immense. In the silence between fire crackles and distant howls, the heavens were always there, marking time, shaping patterns, and perhaps whispering that sleep itself was part of a larger cosmic rhythm. We often imagine sleep in the prehistoric world as a single solid block of unconsciousness. Lie down when it gets dark, wake when the sun rises. But reality was far stranger and perhaps far richer. Evidence suggests that for much of human history, people did not sleep in one stretch but in two, with a waking period in between. This first sleep and second sleep pattern appears not only in ethnographic studies, but also in later historical records, where medieval Europeans described it casually as though it were normal for prehistoric people. That in-between space was not wasted time. It was opportunity. A quiet window when danger was low, the fire still burned, and the mind could wander freely. Far from being idle, these hours were often filled with some of the most meaningful parts of their lives. Storytelling, for instance, thrived in the night. After the first sleep, people would stir, tend the fire, and talk. In that half-light, stories took on a different weight. They weren't rushed or functional like daytime talk. They were expansive, mythic, carrying the memories of ancestors and the lessons of the land. Around the embers, children heard tales that blended history with imagination, while adults reinforced group identity by sharing experiences, victories, and fears. Archaeologists often point to cave art as evidence of storytelling culture, but the words themselves, spoken and passed from one generation to the next, were just as powerful. Sleep in this way didn't divide the night, but punctuated it, creating a stage for narrative. Rituals also found their place in these hours. If dreams were believed to carry meaning, the waking period between sleeps may have been when they were interpreted, shared, or acted upon. A hunter might recount a dream of pursuing game, and the group might plan accordingly. A shaman figure could use the quiet to perform chants, burn herbs, or speak to unseen forces. These were not moments of spectacle, but of intimacy, woven into the normal rhythm of life. The gap between sleeps gave room for reflection, for aligning the spiritual with the practical, and for ensuring that the group didn't simply rest. It renewed itself. Practical tasks also slipped into the night. Tool making, repairing weapons, stitching hides, all of these could be done by firelight. The glow of flames offered just enough visibility to work, and the silence of night gave focus. Archaeological finds of flint, flakes, and fire pits suggest that nighttime tool work was common for groups constantly on the move. These hours may have been essential. After all, daylight was too valuable to waste on small tasks when hunting and foraging demanded full attention. At night, with predators kept at bay by fire and numbers, hands could stay busy, turning broken stones into new blades or shaping bones into needles. Sleep was not absolute rest. It was threaded with productivity. Even intimacy, both physical and emotional, often belonged to these hours. Couples could find privacy in the quiet, and bonds were strengthened away from the bustle of the day. In fact, historians studying segmented sleep in later societies note that these intervals were frequently associated with closeness and conception. For cavemen, this rhythm may have carried the same significance. The hours between sleeps, calm and private, gave space for human connection. In this sense, prehistoric nights were not only about survival, but also about love, care, and the continuation of the group itself. Altogether, the idea of segmented sleep transforms our image of cavemen. Their nights weren't a simple collapse into exhaustion, but layered experiences of rest, conversation, creation, and connection. Science still debates why this pattern faded in the modern world, replaced by the single stretch we now consider normal. But perhaps we lost more than we gained. For our ancestors, the night was not dead time, but living time, full of meaning and activity, framed by two windows of sleep. It was a rhythm that matched their needs and gave depth to their lives. A rhythm that, even if science can't fully explain it, still lingers quietly in the way we sometimes wake in the dark and feel compelled to think, to speak, or to dream again. For cavemen, sleep was more than a nightly pause. It was medicine. Without the safety nets of modern healthcare, every cut, every fever, and every illness depended on the body's natural defenses, and nothing nourished those defenses more than rest. Science today tells us that sleep boosts immune response, helps fight infections, and accelerates healing. And though prehistoric people didn't know the biology, they certainly knew the effect. After a hunt gone wrong, when someone returned with wounds, rest was prescribed instinctively. Elders likely encouraged the injured to lie down near the fire, to drift into long stretches of slumber, letting the body knit itself back together. In this way, sleep became the first doctor, the earliest healer, woven into survival itself. It wasn't only wounds that demanded rest, but illness. Without antibiotics or medicine, the immune system was the only weapon against disease, and it performed best when the body could afford long, deep sleep. Fever, chills, or weakness would naturally push someone into more slumber, conserving energy for recovery. Groups may have noticed that those who were allowed to sleep longer often pulled through illness, while those forced to exert themselves weakened further. In famine or migration, this created painful choices whether to let a sick member rest or push them to move with the group. The balance between compassion and necessity may have played out in countless quiet nights as the firelight flickered over someone fighting for life in sleep. Yet sleep deprivation was just as dangerous then as it is now, perhaps more so. A restless night meant dulled reflexes, slower reactions, and poor judgment, any of which could cost a life. Imagine a hunter stumbling groggy through tall grass, missing the subtle movement of prey, or worse, failing to notice a predator's approach. Poor sleep could ripple into hunger, injury, or death. Science confirms what prehistoric experience must have taught again and again. Sleep is not optional. Without it, survival collapses. The communal nature of sleep also protected health. By sharing warmth and rest, groups reduced the energy each individual needed to maintain body temperature, leaving more resources for healing. Even the nightly rhythms of elders waking early or parents stirring for infants may have had hidden benefits, reducing the chances of the entire group falling into dangerously deep sleep at once. This protective overlap ensured that exhaustion was spread out, not concentrated. It was an imperfect system, but it kept the group functioning even in difficult conditions. Modern research into shared sleep shows lower stress and heart rates in co-sleeping contexts, suggesting our ancestors intuitively tapped into something biologically supportive. Dreams, too, played an indirect role in health. Today, REM sleep is linked with emotional regulation and memory consolidation. For cavemen, the psychological release of dreams may have been equally important. In a harsh world where trauma was common, hunting accidents, predator attacks, loss of kin, the mind needed ways to process fear and grief. Nightly dreams could soften those sharp edges, helping people wake with renewed focus rather than being crushed by despair. In this sense, dreams weren't just spiritual experiences. They were mental therapy, the prehistoric version of resilience training. Altogether, prehistoric sleep reveals itself as both shield and weapon. It healed the body, protected the mind, and gave the immune system its edge against relentless threats. At the same time, the dangers of poor sleep loomed larger than they do for us today, magnifying the risks of exhaustion into matters of life and death. Science can track cytoines and brain waves, but it can't capture the lived truth that every night's rest was a gamble, and every successful dawn was proof of sleep's quiet power. For cavemen, to sleep was to heal, and to heal was to survive. The environment dictated nearly every detail of prehistoric life, and sleep was no exception. Where a group laid their heads was determined not only by preference but by necessity: safety from predators, proximity to water, shelter from weather. Each landscape brought its own challenges, forcing people to adapt their nightly rituals to the land around them. To imagine cavemen sleeping is to imagine them moving through these varied settings. From the cool darkness of caves to the open exposure of grassy plains, the dense cover of forests, and the flowing edges of rivers, each environment left its own imprint on the shape and quality of their rest. Caves, perhaps the most iconic sleeping places of prehistory, offered clear advantages. They provided shelter from wind and rain, insulation from extreme temperatures, and natural boundaries that limited the directions predators could approach from. Archaeological sites like El Castillo in Spain or Blombos in South Africa reveal evidence of long-term cave occupation with ash layers, bedding remains, and sleeping depressions etched into the ground. Yet caves were not perfect havens. Their darkness could be suffocating. Dampness carried health risks, and confined spaces required careful fire management to avoid smoke inhalation. Groups often balanced the safety of caves with the need for ventilation, likely sleeping near entrances where airflow mixed with protection. Sleep in caves was secure but calculated, a negotiation between shelter and comfort. On open plains, sleep took a different form. With no stone walls to lean on, people relied heavily on fire and the collective strength of numbers. Camps were often arranged in circular formations with fires burning in the center and sleepers positioned outward in protective rings. The horizon stretched endlessly, offering no barriers against predators, so vigilance became paramount. Plain sleep was lighter, punctuated by the calls of animals and the rustling of grasses. Yet it also carried its own beauty: the unobstructed night sky, the cooling winds, and the vast sense of openness. In such places, sleep must have felt both fragile and immense, a surrender beneath the stars. Forests offered a different challenge. Dense with trees, vines, and undergrowth, they muffled sound, but also hid dangers. To sleep in a forest was to trust in camouflage. Fires were smaller, sometimes even hidden to avoid attracting predators. Elevated sleeping platforms may have been common, lifting people above damp ground and crawling insects. In some regions, tree hollows or lean-tos crafted from branches served as makeshift shelters. Sleep here was humid, filled with the constant hum of insects and the drip of dew. Yet the abundance of materials made bedding easier, with leaves and grasses readily available to cushion and insulate. Forest sleep was resourceful, practical, and always alert. Riverbanks too shaped unique sleeping habits. Water was essential, but it also carried risks: flooding, mosquitoes, crocodiles, or other predators drawn to the same resource. Archaeological traces suggest that riverside camps were often temporary, used during migrations or seasonal stays. Sleeping close to water likely meant heightened vigilance, with fires kept burning bright and sleeping circles arranged farther from the immediate banks. The sound of rushing water, though, may have offered something akin to comfort, a steady rhythm masking smaller noises, much like white noise does today. It's not difficult to imagine groups drifting to sleep to the flow of a river, balancing danger with the vital need to stay near water. Across these varied environments, one constant shines through adaptability. Cavemen did not cling to one method of rest. They bent their habits to the land. Caves, plains, forests, rivers, each demanded a different strategy, a different relationship with the night. Sleep was never uniform, never one size fits all. It was shaped by rock, grass, tree, and stream just as much as by fire and kinship. Science may measure the physiology of sleep, but the truth of prehistoric nights lies in this endless flexibility. Wherever they went, humans found ways to carve rest from the wilderness, proving that the need for sleep and the ingenuity to protect it has always been one of our greatest strengths. Not every night in prehistory was a battle against cold, hunger, or fear. There were also seasons of abundance when food was plentiful, water sources ran strong, and threats seemed less pressing. In these times, sleep took on a different texture, one less burdened by survival, and more shaped by comfort, restoration, and even a kind of luxury rarely associated with the caveman world. To understand prehistoric sleep fully, it's not enough to imagine the desperate winters or long migrations. We must also imagine the golden seasons, the nights when bellies were full, fires burned strong, and the group could afford to rest without constant anxiety. These moments remind us that human sleep wasn't always fragile. Sometimes it was deeply nourishing, rich, and free. Abundance meant security. When hunting was successful and gathering baskets overflowed with fruits, nuts, or roots, the body entered rest differently. No gnawing hunger kept people awake. No rumbling stomachs stirred them restlessly. Instead, they sank into deeper sleep, their bodies busy digesting rich meals, their immune systems strengthened by steady nutrition. Archaeological studies of isotopes in prehistoric bones show clear differences in health during times of plenty. Stronger bones, fewer signs of stress, and it's fair to assume that their sleep followed the same curve. Full stomachs and reduced anxiety created nights of heavier, more restorative rest, the kind that replenished strength for the next day's work. In these seasons, bedding also improved. With resources available, groups could gather more grasses, leaves, and hides to layer sleeping areas, making them softer and warmer. Evidence from sites like Cebu Cave suggests that bedding was sometimes replaced or refreshed frequently, not out of necessity, but because there was time and energy to do so. Imagine lying on a bed of clean grasses, perfumed slightly by the oils of pest-repelling plants, with animal skins laid on top for warmth. Compared to the harsh images we often have of caveman sleep, these arrangements sound almost indulgent. And for the people living them, they probably were. Abundance also shaped social aspects of sleep with less pressure to remain constantly vigilant. Groups may have enjoyed longer periods of communal storytelling or song before bed. Fires could be kept larger and longer, casting brighter light into the night. The hours between first sleep and second sleep may have been more leisurely, filled with conversation, laughter, or rituals rather than tension. The simple fact of having more energy allowed for richer nighttime lives. Rest didn't just prepare the body for survival. It nourished the soul, weaving joy and connection into the fabric of nightly life. In some regions, abundance may even have introduced something close to what we would call leisure sleep. Napping during the day, dozing in shade, resting without strict necessity. When survival wasn't immediately pressing, the body could afford more flexible rhythms. Anthropological studies of present-day hunter-gatherers in resourceric areas confirm this. When food is easy to obtain, people nap freely, often resting more than modern humans, who paradoxically live with far greater abundance but far less rest. Prehistoric people, at least in the right conditions, may have known the true luxury of unhurried sleep, free from guilt, free from deadlines, anchored only in the rhythms of the land. The contrast between nights of scarcity and nights of plenty underscores one of the greatest truths about prehistoric sleep. It was fluid. It could stretch long and deep when the world was kind, or fracture and shrink when survival demanded it. Science often tries to pin human sleep into a universal pattern, but our ancestors lived in patterns as varied as the seasons. And in those seasons of abundance, they may have experienced sleep that was not only restorative, but profoundly satisfying. A kind of rest that modern humans, with all our distractions and pressures, rarely achieve. In this way, cavemen remind us that the true luxury of sleep lies not in technology or expensive beds, but in safety, nourishment, and the freedom to close one's eyes without fear. If one invention transformed the prehistoric night more than any other, it was fire. Before its mastery, humans were creatures bound to the cycles of light and dark, sleeping and waking in tune with the sun's rise and fall. But once fire entered the picture, everything changed. Suddenly, the night was no longer absolute. Flames pushed back the shadows, offering warmth, protection, and light, creating an entirely new relationship with sleep. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans controlled fire at least 400,000 years ago, possibly even earlier. And from that moment onward, the way our ancestors rested was never the same. Fire didn't just make nights safer. It carved deep grooves into the rhythms of human life. Grooves that still echo in us today. The warmth of fire reshaped how and where people could sleep. In colder climates, it meant groups no longer had to rely solely on huddling for survival. A well-tended fire allowed for more spacious sleeping arrangements, giving families breathing room while still warding off frostbite and hypothermia. In warmer regions, fire provided comfort without overheating, offering steady heat through cooler nights. Archaeological sites show hearths deliberately placed near sleeping areas with ash layers suggesting constant use. To sleep by fire was to extend the boundaries of habitable land, opening colder territories to human settlement. In this sense, fire wasn't just a convenience. It was an invitation to expand, and sleep was its beneficiary. Protection was another gift of fire. Predators that once prowled freely now hesitated at the edge of flickering flames. Lions, leopards, and hyenas, all naturally wary of fire, kept their distance. To close one's eyes in the glow of embers was to find a measure of peace rarely possible before. This safety wasn't absolute, of course. Desperate predators sometimes pressed in regardless, but the reduction in threat was revolutionary. Some anthropologists argue that this security fundamentally changed human sleep, allowing deeper, longer rest. In evolutionary terms, fire may have enabled us to shift from purely light, alert sleep to richer, more restorative cycles, supporting brain development, memory, and creativity. In other words, fire didn't just keep us alive at night. It made us smarter. Light itself carried subtle but powerful effects. The glow of flames extended waking hours, but not in the jarring way artificial light does today. Firelight is warm, red-toned, and doesn't disrupt melatonin production as much as blue light from screens. It allowed groups to gather after sunset to tell stories, repair tools, or perform rituals without entirely losing touch with natural circadian rhythms. The presence of this gentle illumination likely reinforced segmented sleep patterns. First sleep, wakeful period by the fire, second sleep. In this way, fire became a silent timekeeper, shaping the rhythm of night into something flexible, productive, and still restful. There is also evidence that fire's influence reached into the mind itself. Some researchers suggest that staring into flames encouraged trance-like states, easing the transition into sleep. The rhythmic crackle, the dance of light, the hypnotic sway of embers. All of it created a natural sedative. Even today, many people report feeling calm and drowsy around a campfire as though tapping into an ancient neurological response. Fire may have been our first sleep aid, not through chemicals, but through its ability to soothe, to quiet the nervous system, and to prepare the body for rest. Its presence was more than physical. It was psychological, offering reassurance that the night could be tamed. Altogether, fire transformed the prehistoric night from a time of terror into a time of possibility. It provided warmth, drove off predators, extended waking hours, and may even have rewired our biology toward deeper, more meaningful sleep. Science can measure brain waves, hormones, and circadian shifts, but it still struggles to capture the primal comfort of embers glowing beside you while the world outside howls. For cavemen, fire was both shield and companion, a heartbeat in the darkness that made sleep not only possible but profoundly human. Without it, our species might never have thrived as it did. With it, we became dreamers. Food and sleep are more intertwined than most people realize. And for cavemen, this connection was far more immediate than it is today. Without pantries or supermarkets, every meal came from the land and carried direct consequences for the night ahead. A day of successful hunting, yielding fresh meat rich in protein and fat, produced not only nourishment, but also a deep satisfied exhaustion. A day of foraging, filling baskets with berries, nuts, or roots left the body fueled differently. Lighter, but often less sustained through the night. Archaeological studies of isotopes in bones and teeth reveal that prehistoric diets were astonishingly varied, shifting constantly with seasons, migrations, and luck. And with those shifts, sleep itself followed, sometimes heavy and replenishing, sometimes restless and shallow. Protein-heavy meals from meat or fish provided dense calories that sustained longer rest. After feasting on a large kill, groups likely experienced deeper sleep, aided by the body's natural drowsiness during digestion. Modern science shows that diets high in protein can increase the amount of slow-wave sleep, the deep restorative phase that repairs tissues and strengthens memory. Prehistoric people may not have known the chemistry, but they felt the results. A night of heavy sleep after a day of successful hunting. Yet this was balanced by scarcity, for large kills were not everyday events. Some nights, groups went to sleep with stomachs still aching from hunger, their bodies restless in their dreams shaped by want. Plant-based foraging days carried their own rhythms. Berries and fruits offered quick energy but not lasting fullness, while nuts and tubers provided slower burning fuel. Sleep after these meals may have been lighter with earlier waking and more frequent stirring. Interestingly, anthropological studies of hunter-gatherer societies today show that even small differences in diet can shape sleep duration and depth. For cavemen, this constant fluctuation wasn't just normal, it was life. Their nights rose and fell with what the land offered. In seasons when plants ripened in abundance, sleep was likely more consistent, supported by steady calories. In lean seasons, rest was fragile, haunted by the thinness of empty bellies. The timing of meals also shaped sleep patterns. In many regions, the biggest meals likely happened late in the day after hunts or foraging trips returned. This rhythm mirrored natural circadian patterns, with the body winding down after the heaviest nourishment. A group eating roasted meat around a fire at dusk would soon sink into rest, their bodies working through digestion, even as the mind slipped into dreams. Archaeological evidence of charred bones and seeds at ancient hearths suggests that evenings were mealtime hubs, combining nourishment with community. Sleep followed naturally, making dinner and rest inseparable. In a sense, the prehistoric dinner table was the first bedtime ritual. The nutrients themselves may also have subtly influenced prehistoric rest. Certain plants contain compounds that calm the body, much like teas or herbs do today. Archaeologists have found traces of medicinal plant use in Neanderthal remains, including iroh and chamomile-like species. If such plants were consumed before sleep, whether intentionally for their effects or coincidentally as part of meals, they could have acted as early sleep aids. The same applies to fermented fruits, which may have introduced mild alcohol into diets. Nights after such meals may have been deeper, dreamier, or even disordered, depending on the dose. The prehistoric diet wasn't just fuel for waking life. It was chemistry that touched sleep in subtle but powerful ways. Altogether, the prehistoric link between diet and sleep reveals a cycle far more immediate than ours today. Every hunt, every harvest, every lucky or unlucky day shaped how the group slept that night. Science can trace these connections through hormones, blood sugar, and brain chemistry. But what it cannot capture is the lived truth. The relief of drifting into slumber after a feast, the restlessness of lying awake with hunger gnawing, the subtle sway of herbs or fermented fruits coaxing the mind into dreams. For cavemen, food didn't just sustain waking life. It sculpted the very shape of the night. When our ancestors first ventured out of Africa, they carried more than tools and fire. They carried sleep patterns tuned to the equator. Near the tropics, days and nights remain relatively consistent year-round, with roughly 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark. Sleep there fell into a steady rhythm shaped by predictable cycles. But as humans spread into Eurasia and beyond, they encountered a world of extremes, endless summer light, crushing winter darkness, and seasons where the balance of day and night shifted dramatically. This was no small adjustment. It reshaped when they rested, how long they slept, and even how communities organized themselves through the night. In equatorial regions, where our species first thrived, sleep was deeply tied to natural dusk and dawn. Modern studies of hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza and Sun show that people there tend to rise with the first light and fall asleep not long after sunset. Artificial light never played a role, so the body's circadian rhythm locked tightly to solar time. Nights were dark but not harshly cold, and people could rest outdoors or in simple shelters. The regularity of these cycles may have been the evolutionary foundation of human sleep, a steady pattern carried in our biology. Even as our migrations pulled us into stranger landscapes as groups moved north into Ice Age Europe, this balance shattered. In summer, daylight stretched for long hours, leaving only brief windows of darkness. In winter, night seemed endless, swallowing the sun for the majority of the day. Cavemen had to adapt their sleep to these extremes. Archaeologists and anthropologists suspect that in the far north, humans may have leaned toward polyphasic sleep, resting in multiple chunks rather than one long block. During summer, naps in shaded areas could compensate for short, hot nights. While in winter, extended bouts of rest may have blurred the line between night and day. Sleep became elastic, stretching or contracting with the sun's whims. The psychological impact of these shifts cannot be underestimated. Imagine months where night barely arrives, where fire glows but the sky never truly darkens. Sleep under such conditions would have been fragile, interrupted, and perhaps even confusing. Conversely, in winters of near-total darkness, humans faced something closer to enforced rest, with long hours of inactivity pressing on body and mind. Some researchers speculate that this might have encouraged creative activity, storytelling, tool-making, ritual in the absence of sunlight. The rhythms of sleep here were not only biological, but cultural, woven into how communities chose to spend the endless hours of shadow or light. The evidence of this adaptability lives in our bodies even today. Genetic studies show that humans carry slight variations in circadian rhythm genes, possibly inherited from populations that spread into different latitudes. Some of us are naturally early birds, others night owls, and this diversity may reflect an ancient survival strategy. In environments of extreme light variation, flexibility was key. A group with mixed sleep tendencies ensured that someone was always alert. Whether under midnight sun or polar night, prehistoric migration didn't just spread humans across the globe. It spread their sleeping patterns, diversifying them to meet the challenges of new skies. Altogether, the migration across latitudes demonstrates just how plastic human sleep has always been. It wasn't fixed, rigid, or fragile. It bent with the equator, stretched in the north, compressed in the south, and learned to dance with the shifting balance of day and night. Science today struggles to explain why modern humans so often feel jet-lagged by artificial schedules. But the answer may lie in this deep history. Our sleep was designed to be adaptable, to mold itself to landscapes, skies, and seasons. Prehistoric people carried no clocks, yet they mastered rhythms far more flexible than our own. And in that flexibility lies another secret. Perhaps the greatest strength of human sleep is not its depth or length, but its ability to bend without breaking. When we imagine prehistoric nights, it's tempting to picture everyone huddled together in identical patterns. But sleep, like every other aspect of life, was shaped by roles, responsibilities, and the unequal demands placed on different members of the group. Gender, age, and task all played a part in who rested when, who woke first, and who bore the heavier burdens of broken sleep. Archaeology can't give us a minute-by-minute account of these rhythms, but ethnographic studies of hunter-gatherers living today offer a window into how these dynamics may have unfolded in the deep past. Sleep was never truly the same for everyone. For women, especially those raising young children, rest was fragmented by necessity. Infants demanded near constant care, pulling mothers into cycles of waking and soothing that stretched through the night. Nursing required light sleep and quick responsiveness, leaving many women unable to sink into long, uninterrupted rest. Yet, this very disruption provided a hidden layer of protection for the group. Mothers, always half alert, became natural sentinels. Their wakefulness, ensuring that the fire was fed and that disturbances in the night were noticed. Sleep for women, then, was not only biological but social, a form of labor, often unrecognized, that contributed directly to group safety. Men, particularly hunters, experienced different rhythms. After long days of pursuit, their sleep was often heavier and more consolidated, the body demanding repair and replenishment. But even this wasn't universal. In many societies, men took on watch duties at the periphery of camps, positioning themselves where danger would strike first. Some may have alternated between deep rest after hunts and lighter, more vigilant slumber when the group was especially vulnerable. The stereotype of men sleeping undisturbed, while women tended fires and children, oversimplifies the truth. Prehistoric nights demanded flexibility from everyone, with responsibilities shifting according to circumstance. Who was exhausted, who was healthy, and who was needed most. Gender roles also shaped sleeping arrangements. Archaeological traces suggest that women and children often slept together in the safest areas of caves or shelters, clustered closest to the fire, while men positioned themselves nearer entrances or exposed edges. This distribution reinforced the social expectation that men acted as protectors while women safeguarded the most vulnerable within the group. At the same time, it created a nightly rhythm of care, intimacy, and protection that bound families tightly together. To lie down in these patterns was not just about comfort, but about reaffirming identity and responsibility within the band. There's also evidence that tasks performed by gender carried into the nighttime hours. Women, who were often primary gatherers, may have used the quiet between first sleep and second sleep to weave, repair clothing, or prepare food. Men, with their focus on hunting, might have sharpened tools or shared strategies for the coming day. Night was not only a time of rest, but also an extension of daily work, structured subtly by gender. This division wasn't rigid. Necessity could blur it, but it suggests that prehistoric nights carried the same practical inequalities as the day. Together, these rhythms reveal that prehistoric sleep was not uniform, but shaped by roles that echoed beyond waking hours. Women bore the weight of fragmented rest through childcare. Men balanced heavy exertion with protective vigilance, and children themselves reshaped the group's patterns with their needs. Elders added another layer, their lighter sleep, reinforcing safety for all. Science can track the biological benefits of rest, but the social texture of who slept when and why adds a deeper truth. Prehistoric sleep was as much about responsibility as recovery, and in those responsibilities, gender shaped the night as surely as fire or moonlight did. For modern sleepers, silence is often considered the key to rest. We buy soundproof windows, white noise machines, and noise-canceling devices to chase away the interruptions of the world. But for prehistoric people, silence was almost unimaginable. The night was alive with sound. The crackle of fire, the distant cries of predators, the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, the breathing of nearby kin. To fall asleep in such an environment was to surrender not to quiet, but to a chorus, a soundscape that could soothe, warn, or frighten. Their nights were a tapestry of noise, and sleep had to learn to coexist with it. The fire itself was one of the most constant voices of the night. Its steady crackle and occasional pop provided reassurance that warmth and protection were still near. Some anthropologists suggest that this rhythm became psychologically comforting, much like the hum of machines or fans does for us today. The glow and sound of fire together likely lulled people into slumber, reminding them that the group was safe. Yet the fire was not always a friend. A sudden loud snap could jolt someone awake, sparking fear of intruders or predators. The duality of fire sound, both soothing and startling, made it an integral part of the prehistoric sleep experience. Predators added their own unsettling soundtrack. Hyenas cackled in the distance. Wolves howled. Lions roared across plains. Each of these sounds carried information: how close danger was, how many animals there might be, whether the group needed to rouse itself or could stay at rest. Cavemen did not simply hear these calls. They interpreted them. The ability to distinguish between a distant roar and one that was too close for comfort could mean the difference between life and death. Modern studies show that human brains are still particularly attuned to animal sounds in sleep, often waking more readily to them than to artificial noises. This sensitivity is not coincidence. It is inheritance. Insects created another constant layer of sound. The buzzing of mosquitoes, the drone of crickets, the rasp of cicadas. These were less frightening, but no less significant. For some, they may have been maddening distractions. For others, they became background rhythm. Modern research shows that consistent sounds, even irritating ones, can fade into white noise for the brain, smoothing sleep rather than breaking it. Cavemen likely experienced this same adaptation. The ceaseless hum of insects may have been the steady backdrop against which the body slipped into rest. An unavoidable but strangely reliable soundtrack. And then there were the sounds of the group itself. Breathing, shifting, coughing, murmuring in dreams, all the small noises of communal life carried through the night. Even snoring, often mocked today, may have had unexpected value in prehistory. A loud snorer could deter predators by mimicking growls or larger bodies in the dark. Alternatively, it may simply have been tolerated as part of living close together. One more note in the chorus of survival. The presence of these sounds reinforced intimacy, reminding each sleeper that they were not alone. To rest surrounded by the voices of kin was to be wrapped in both comfort and responsibility. Taken together, these layers of sound-shaped prehistoric sleep. Not as fragile, but as adaptive, cavemen didn't require silence to rest. They needed familiarity. Fire, predators, insects, kin. These were the voices of their world, and the brain learned to filter them, to respond when necessary, and to drift when safe. Science today can measure brain activity in response to noises, but it cannot capture the subtle emotional truth that every pop, howl, and snore was a signal woven into the nightly fabric of rest. For cavemen, to sleep was never to escape sound. It was to listen differently, to find peace within the constant chorus of the night. For cavemen, the night sky wasn't just a backdrop of stars. It was also a stage for weather, and weather could make or break a night's rest. Unlike us, they had no solid walls or double-glazed windows to dull the force of the elements. When the sky opened, they felt it directly. When winds howled, they shook with it. When thunder cracked, the earth seemed to tremble beneath their bedding of hides and grass. Sleep under such conditions was never guaranteed. It could be comforting, terrifying, or outright impossible depending on what the heavens decided to unleash. In many ways, the atmosphere itself was the ultimate master of prehistoric sleep. Rain carried two faces in the prehistoric night. On gentle evenings, steady rainfall offered a soothing rhythm, masking other sounds and cooling hot air. Groups sheltered in caves or under makeshift coverings may have found comfort in the patter. The way we might relax to a rain sound recording today, but heavy downpours told a different story. For those in open camps or near riverbanks, rain meant soaking hides, extinguished fires, and the sudden threat of flooding. Archaeological evidence of water-damaged hearts suggests that whole nights could be lost to storms with people huddling sleeplessly against wet ground, waiting for the skies to clear. In such times, rain was not lullaby but enemy. Thunderstorms heightened the drama. Imagine lying in a cave as the walls echoed with booms or on a plain where lightning split the horizon in blinding flashes. For prehistoric people, lightning was not only frightening but mysterious. Raw power tearing through the sky without explanation. Sleep in such moments would have been fractured, shallow, or absent altogether. Some anthropologists speculate that these events fed into myth-making, gods or spirits speaking through storms, demanding attention rather than rest. If dreams were guidance, then storms were their waking counterpart, visions written across the heavens. To sleep through them would have seemed careless, maybe even dangerous. Wind, too, shaped the quality of sleep. In forests, it rattled leaves and branches, creating endless false alarms. On open plains, it swept through camps with chilling force, making fires difficult to maintain. In caves, gusts whistling through cracks could unsettle sleepers, sounding like distant voices or approaching steps. Yet wind also carried reassurance, the scent of rain, the cooling touch on hot nights, or simply the confirmation that the world beyond the fire still moved. To lie awake, listening to the wind, was to remain connected to the wider world, even when wrapped in hides and half asleep. It was reminder and warning both. Seasonal weather cycles carried long-term effects. Monsoons, dry seasons, and winter storms forced entire shifts in how groups slept. In regions prone to seasonal flooding, people may have abandoned low-lying shelters for higher ground, altering sleeping patterns entirely. In icy winters, snowstorms trapped groups inside caves, compressing them into tighter spaces for longer hours of communal rest. Archaeological sites sometimes show layers of ash built up thickly in winter strata, suggesting fires burned day and night, sleep bending to the storm outside. These cycles weren't inconveniences. They were life-shaping events, carving sleep into new forms every few months. For all its unpredictability, weather became part of the prehistoric lullaby. Rain softened fears. Storms etched awe. Winds whispered warnings, and snow forced intimacy. Modern science can tell us how noise or temperature affects rain cycles, but it struggles to capture the raw immediacy of those nights when thunder shook the ground, when rain drowned the fire, when a gust of wind hinted at predators nearby. For cavemen, sleep was never sealed off from the sky. It was negotiated with it. Each night was a dialogue between body, shelter, and weather. And each dawn was proof that the balance had held one more time. To understand how prehistoric people slept, we can't just imagine where they lay down. We also have to imagine how the human body itself has changed over tens of thousands of years. And those changes shape the very posture and comfort of rest. Unlike us, with our memory foam mattresses and orthopedic pillows, cavemen had to adapt their bones and muscles to the uneven ground, the bundled hides, the simple bedding of grasses and leaves. Their sleep positions weren't chosen for luxury but for survival, practicality, and endurance. And yet, the evidence suggests that their bodies were not only capable of this, they were well suited to it. Skeletal studies of early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals reveal robust frames with stronger spines, thicker bones, and more developed musculature than modern humans. These bodies were built for labor, for long treads, for climbing and carrying. Such strength also meant resilience in sleep. Lying on hard or uneven surfaces would not have caused the same chronic back pain we associate with it today. In fact, research on people who still sleep on firm ground, from nomadic groups to rural farmers, shows lower rates of spinal problems than those in societies with soft bedding. Our ancestors' sleep may have looked uncomfortable to us, but to them it was perfectly natural. Posture played a role as well. Many anthropologists believe that side sleeping was common, not only because it reduced pressure on the back, but because it allowed close physical contact with others. Parents curled around children. Couples tucked close for warmth, groups forming protective arcs. Side sleeping also made it easier to rouse quickly, springing to one knee or foot if danger arose. Stomach sleeping, while possible, may have been less common as it pressed the face into bedding and made alertness harder. Back sleeping likely occurred, but in smaller doses, as it left the body more exposed. The most natural position was one that balanced rest with readiness, a bodily compromise between comfort and caution. Another detail lies in head support. Pillows, as we know them, didn't exist, but early humans weren't without solutions. Bundles of hides, folded arms, or small mounds of grass served as makeshift headrests. Archaeologists have found evidence of bedding layers deliberately built up at one end, creating slight elevation. This not only aided comfort, but also reduced inhalation of smoke or dust common in cave settings. Even without modern ergonomics, cavemen engineered sleeping arrangements that eased strain and allowed deeper rest. Their ingenuity stretched as much into posture as it did into fire or shelter. The body itself adapted to these nightly conditions. Stronger joints and muscles supported positions that would leave modern people aching. Daily activity, walking, climbing, squatting, strengthened flexibility, making it easier to fold into curled positions on hard ground. Children growing up in these environments develop bodies accustomed to firm bedding and communal sleeping arrangements. Unlike us, who often suffer when forced to rough it, they were conditioned from birth to thrive in it. Sleep posture was not something to be corrected. It was simply another part of a body shaped by the demands of the land. Altogether, the physicality of prehistoric sleep reminds us that what feels natural today is not universal. Cavemen did not need thick mattresses or precise spinal alignment to sleep deeply. Their bodies were sturdier, their nightly habits tuned to survival rather than comfort, and their sleep postures reflected that. Science can measure the angles of bones and estimate muscle load, but it can't quite capture the ease with which a prehistoric family might curl together on hides side by side, waking with bodies ready for another day of labor. For them, sleep was not fragile, but embodied, a physical act as much as a mental one, woven into the very strength of their bones. Illness and injury were unavoidable companions in the prehistoric world. A single bad fall, a deep cut from a hunt, or the fever of an infection could change not only the life of an individual, but the nightly rhythm of an entire group. Unlike us, with our antibiotics and hospitals, cavemen relied on two things above all else: their own resilience and the care of those around them. Sleep was central to both. To fall ill in those times meant longer hours of rest, often close to the fire, where warmth could fight chills and smoke might ease breathing. Nights became acts of recovery as the group adjusted its routines to ensure the sick had the chance to sleep deeply enough to heal. Archaeological evidence provides striking proof that prehistoric communities supported their vulnerable members. Fossils of Neanderthals, for instance, show individuals who lived for years with serious injuries, including severe arthritis, loss of limbs, or even blindness. Survival with such conditions would have been impossible without group care. That care extended into the night. The injured would have needed extra insulation, assistance turning in sleep, or help staying close to warmth. This suggests that prehistoric sleep was not just a private matter, but a communal responsibility. Caring for the vulnerable at night was a shared duty, one that bound the group together as much as hunting or gathering did by day. Injury also reshaped the sleeping arrangements themselves. A hunter with a broken leg might no longer sleep on the perimeter where movement was essential for protection, but instead be placed deeper inside the circle of kin. Those with chronic pain might be given softer bedding made from additional grasses or hides, while children or kin lay beside them to provide warmth. In this way, sleep patterns became fluid, shifting to meet the needs of whoever required the most care. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers find similar practices. Sick members are often placed in central sheltered spots during the night. Prehistoric groups almost certainly did the same, creating a nightly balance between protection and compassion. Illness added another layer of complexity. Fevers, chills, and coughing disturbed the rhythm of group rest. Yet these disruptions may have served as natural warnings, keeping others awake and alert. Some illnesses may have carried contagious risks, but isolation was difficult in communal sleeping arrangements. Instead, care meant enduring the interruptions, sacrificing individual comfort for the survival of the group. Even so, sleep remained the most powerful medicine. Rest allowed the body to fight infection. Fever dreams may have been interpreted as spiritual signs, and the recovery of a sick member reinforced the value of patience and support. In the prehistoric night, sleep was both treatment and test. Disability, too, left its imprint on group rhythms. A person unable to hunt or gather still had value at night. Their lighter sleep or limited mobility may have made them natural watchers, stirring at small sounds that others ignored. The elderly and disabled, often marginalized in modern imagination, may in fact have played vital roles in group survival precisely because their sleep was fragmented. Their vigilance and presence by the fire protected others while their experience guided responses to danger. Sleep in this sense gave purpose even to those who could not contribute physically in the day. The prehistoric night was not a time of exclusion, but of reintegration where every role found meaning altogether. Illness, injury, and disability revealed a deeply human heart of prehistoric sleep. It wasn't just about the individual lying down to rest. It was about the group making space for vulnerability to ensure someone could sleep safely, and recover was to ensure the community endured. Science can measure how sleep aids healing, but the archaeology of compassion, bones healed, lives extended, shows us something deeper, that even in the harshest of times, our ancestors carved tenderness into their nights. Sleep wasn't only survival, it was solidarity. Few things disrupted prehistoric sleep as profoundly as pregnancy and childbirth. For women, carrying life in a world without midwives or medicine was both miracle and peril, and the night hours reflected that tension. Pregnancy altered the rhythms of rest, making sleep lighter, more restless, or fragmented. Archaeological evidence of pelvic adaptations in early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals shows that childbirth was physically demanding, and anthropological studies of traditional societies suggest that expectant mothers experienced constant fatigue. Nights became battlegrounds between exhaustion and discomfort, with the group adjusting to support mothers to be through this fragile, vital time. Sleep during pregnancy likely mirrored what women experience today. Difficulty finding comfortable positions, frequent waking, and heightened vulnerability. Without pillows or soft mattresses, posture was limited. Yet women adapted by sleeping in semi-upright positions against bedding mounds or nestled into kin for support. Mothers may have taken central places in sleeping circles protected by adults and warmed by the fire. Their restless nights became part of the group's rhythm as nearby sleepers adjusted, soothed, or woke to assist. In this sense, pregnancy was not an individual condition, but a collective state. Its challenges distributed across the community through the way everyone rested. Childbirth itself reshaped the night entirely. It often happened after dark, when labor pains stretched into hours of uncertainty, punctuated by cries, whispers, and the tense watchfulness of kin. For the group, sleep would have been suspended, firelight repurposed into a beacon of focus and fear. Ethnographic parallels suggest that women may have been assisted by other women, while men and children kept back, anxious yet attentive. In those hours, sleep was irrelevant. Survival hinged on the safe arrival of new life. And when an infant's first cries finally echoed into the night, exhaustion was washed away by relief, only to be replaced by the sleepless demands of care. Newborns changed sleep for everyone. Infants slept in short, erratic bursts, waking often to feed, fuss, or be soothed. For mothers, this meant fractured nights, a cycle of waking and dozing that might stretch for months. Fathers and kin shared some of this burden, offering warmth, rocking, or simply wakefulness in solidarity. The whole group adapted. Lighter sleep became the norm, with mothers' rest scattered into fragments between feedings. Archaeologists studying Neanderthal sites have noted infant remains buried close to adults, suggesting a closeness in life as well. Children nestled against caregivers during rest, their cries pulling others into half-alert states that paradoxically kept the group more vigilant as a whole. Pregnancy and infancy also deepened the role of elders in nightly life. Grandmothers, often beyond childbearing, may have taken on crucial tasks, rocking infants, tending fires, or comforting restless children so that exhausted parents could rest. This so-called grandmother hypothesis suggests that post-reproductive women played a pivotal role in extending human lifespans by supporting child survival. At night, their lighter, more fragmented sleep made them natural caregivers. They were the ones most likely to stir at a cry or tend the embers when others were too weary. Far from being peripheral, they were anchors of safety and continuity in the nightly chaos of newborn care. Altogether, pregnancy and childbirth turned prehistoric sleep into something communal, chaotic, and profoundly human. Nights became symphonies of wakefulness, mothers nursing, infants crying, elders rocking, fires crackling, fathers guarding. Science can map the hormonal shifts of pregnancy or the REM cycles of infants, but it cannot capture the tenderness of a newborn pressed against a mother's chest as the group dozed around her. In the prehistoric night, the fragility of new life reshaped rest for all, reminding the group of both its vulnerability and its strength. Sleep in those moments was not only recovery, but the shared labor of love. Few events disrupted the delicate balance of prehistoric nights more than death. In small groups where every individual mattered, the loss of one person was not just emotional but practical. Fewer hands to hunt, fewer eyes to watch, fewer voices to reassure. And yet, long before formal religions or recorded traditions, humans seem to have responded to death with ritual. Archaeological discoveries of intentional burials among Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens show that grief was not a modern invention. It was carved into our species from the beginning. At night, these moments of mourning reshaped sleep, turning what was usually a rhythm of survival into long hours of reflection, fear, and remembrance. Death carried its own kind of sleeplessness. The absence of a familiar breath or snore in the communal circle would have been keenly felt. A space left empty where someone once lay could unsettle the group, disrupting the comfort of shared rest. Anthropologists studying grief in traditional societies note that mourners often sleep less, their nights punctuated by wakefulness, tears, or rituals performed in honor of the dead. It is not hard to imagine the same among cavemen, firelight flickering over silent figures, some staring into the flames instead of lying down, others waking often from unsettled dreams. The very rhythm of night would have been altered by loss. Some groups may have responded with ritualized vigils, staying awake together by the fire, guarding the body before burial, or keeping watch against the unknown. The fear of spirits or predators disturbing the dead may have encouraged these sleepless nights, blending practical concerns with spiritual unease. Archaeological evidence of flowers and tools placed in Neanderthal graves suggests that mourning went beyond the functional. It carried symbolism, perhaps even belief in some form of afterlife or lingering presence. If so, then the nights after a death were not only heavy with sadness, but also with meaning, as sleep was sacrificed for ceremonies that reinforced bonds and offered comfort. Grief also shaped dreams. Modern psychology shows that people often dream vividly of the dead, and such experiences may have been even more powerful for prehistoric minds. A dream of a lost companion appearing by the fire or speaking in whispers would not have been dismissed as imagination. It may have been taken as proof that the dead lived on in another form, guiding or warning the group. In this way, mourning and sleep intertwined. The night became not just a time of loss, but also a space of connection where the boundary between life and death blurred in visions that felt profoundly real. The impact of death on group sleep extended beyond the immediate nights of mourning. Fear lingered. If someone had died from injury or predator attack, the group might sleep more lightly, shifting arrangements to guard the weak. If illness claimed a member, others might fear contagion, spreading out or creating new patterns of distance. Mourning was not only emotional, but practical, forcing groups to reconsider how they slept, where they lay, and how they trusted the night. Death was both rupture and reorganization, shaking the foundations of rest before slowly settling into new patterns. Altogether, the presence of death in prehistoric life reminds us that sleep was never insulated from emotion. Joy, fear, love, and grief all spilled into the night, shaping when and how people lay down. Science can analyze hormones released during grief or map the effects of stress on RM cycles, but it cannot capture the raw experience of a small group gathered around a dimming fire, one voice forever silenced and the others learning to rest without it. In those moments, sleep became not just survival but remembrance, a fragile bridge between the world of the living and the memories of those gone. As we've wandered together through the prehistoric night, tracing the glow of fires, the hush of caves, the echoes of predators, and the whisper of dreams, it becomes clear that caveman's sleep was never simple. It was fragile and fierce, fractured and deep, a rhythm of survival that wove biology, environment, and community into one nightly ritual. They slept in circles for safety, stirred for infants and elders, adapted to weather and seasons, and found meaning in dreams that science still struggles to fully explain. Their nights were not silent voids, but living hours where rest was strategy, medicine, ritual, and bond. Every detail, from insect-repelling bedding to the watchful eyes of grandmothers, reminds us that even in the darkness, they were not helpless. They were human, inventing ways to make sleep work for them against all odds. What science reveals today is astonishing, but it also humbles us. We know how melatonin regulates circadian rhythms, how RAM repairs the mind, how slow-wave sleep restores the body, yet we still wrestle with insomnia, shift work, and the restlessness of modern life. Cavemen with none of our science often slept better than we do, not because their nights were easy, but because their rest was aligned with the world around them. They surrendered to natural darkness, rose with the light, listened to their bodies, and adapted with a flexibility we've almost forgotten. They lived in sync with rhythms far older than civilization, and in that alignment lay the secrets we struggle to reclaim. The mysteries remain. Did Ice Age humans truly drift towards semi-hibernation in brutal winters? Did dreams guide entire migrations? Did fire reshape our brains to allow deeper sleep and richer imagination? These are questions science still can't fully answer. But the evidence whispers that sleep was more than biology for them. It was sacred. It carried meaning, power, and connection to forces they couldn't see. To close their eyes was to trust not just in their bodies but in each other, in fire, in sky, in dreams. Sleep was a shared act of faith in the possibility of tomorrow. And maybe that's the greatest secret of all. That sleep was never just for the individual, but for the group. It protected the young, honored the old, healed the sick, and united the healthy. It was an invisible thread, drawing every member of the band into a single rhythm, binding them through fear and through love. In their vulnerability, they found strength together, turning the darkest hours into a place of safety and renewal. That lesson hasn't changed, even if we've forgotten it. We sleep best when we feel safe, when we feel connected, when the world outside doesn't intrude. Conditions that, ironically, cavemen often knew better than we do. So, as you drift toward your own sleep, now think of them, our ancestors under the stars. In caves by rivers on open plains, think of fires crackling low, of elders watching the night, of infants stirring and mothers soothing, of men sharpening tools in the hours between sleeps. Think of the balance they struck between danger and peace, and the resilience that carried them through countless nights until dawn. The secrets of their sleep may never be fully explained by science, but their example lingers in us still. In the way our bodies stir at the dark, in the way dreams guide us, in the way we all seek safety before closing our eyes. And with that, we'll close this journey into the ancient night. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me through the shadows and embers of prehistoric sleep. I hope this story not only soothed you, but gave you something to carry. A reminder that sleep is older than civilization, and that the mysteries of the caveman night still live quietly within us. Until next time, rest well, dream deeply, and may your own night be just a little more peaceful.